Hello, my name is Mathias, and welcome to the Weekly Wildcard Draft, where I usually take a look at what I think is the best squad in Fantasy Premier League going forward for the next 4 or 5 game weeks. But seeing as we are in the middle of an international break with no Premier League action at the weekend, I figured this week's edition of the Weekly Wildcard Draft should be something a bit different. So instead of picking players that I really like going forward, I'm going to look back into the past and pick out the players that I haven't liked this season. The players that have done me wrong, that have done really badly for me and done really well for other people. These are basically the Hall of Shame this season for me, because there are a lot of players that have failed me this season, because it's looking like my worst season of all time, which is kind of stupid when when I just started making YouTube content with Fantasy Premier League. But anyways, this is one of those types of content, the Weekly Wildcard Draft, and let's just go straight into it. And before we go into the team, the proper team with 15 players, we have some dishonorable mentions in each positions. First up, in goalkeeper, we have David Raya, who I currently have in my squad, and he might redeem himself eventually, but so far this season hasn't really performed that well. I think I've had him for like 5 game weeks so far, and he's had 1 clean sheet out of those 5 matches, I should say, because he had a double game week where he had 1 clean sheet in one of the matches. And that's the only clean sheet he's had for me in the 5 matches he's played in my team. So yeah, he could still turn it around, but he's been pretty poor for me, and he's been like one of the top scoring goalkeepers in general in FPL. So I feel really hard done by Raya, but I think he might redeem himself eventually. The defender, I don't think he's going to redeem himself. That is James Tarkowski. I brought him in for double game week 25 for Everton, and he got a big fat 0 points, and he performed really badly the next game week as well. And then I did the wildcard, and he started performing again, of course, because that's the type of player that I attract in FPL this season. But anyways, Tarkowski is the defender. Dishonorable mention. In terms of midfielders, it is Jarrod Bowen. And Bowen I had for the first 5 game weeks of the season. I'm a West Ham fan, so it was I play with my heart picking Bowen for the first game week. I almost picked another player that is in the squad, but I ended up with Bowen instead for my game week 1 team, and he blanked it 5 game weeks in a row, and then I just sold him and never looked back, never brought him back. He's been decent at some points this season, but for the most part it's been a huge disappointment, considering he was so good last season and scored over 200 points, Jarrod Bowen. So the forward as well, another West Ham player, it is Gianluca Scamacca. I brought him in when I wildcarded in game week 13. He had just scored in his last 2 home games, and he had 3 out of the next 4 were home games. The first one was a match against Bournemouth, and I was so sure he was going to score, but nope, no goals. Didn't score in the following away fixture, and then he had 2 home games after that, and he blanked in the first one while playing 90 minutes, and the second one he was subbed off at the half, and I sold him. I never looked back. So yet another West Ham player that I had and blanked for a couple of game weeks, and then I sold him. So that seems to be the story for West Ham players, and that's why I'm sort of not considering having any West Ham players for double game week 29, even though they have some of the best fixtures currently. But those are the 4 dishonorable mentions. Let's get into the proper team, and we're going to go in reverse order. So we're going to go, the first pick is going to be the 15th player, like the player that annoyed me the least, but still an annoying player. And I know a lot of you guys have been annoyed by this guy as well, because he is the main FPL troll, and it is Alexander Mitrovic, who is the classic troll for everyone. He trolled me as well. He was someone I brought in game week 8. He had such a great start to the season. The first 7 game weeks he scored against big teams all the time, got a lot of points, was one of the top scoring strikers. Brought him in for a hit in game week 8, and he started just blanking every single game against easier opposition. 2 points, 2 points. He had 1 game he scored, I think, and then some more 2-pointers, and then he got injured. But that's the thing with Mitrovic. Like I have not had him since then, so I wasn't one of the ones that brought him in for game week 18, like a lot of people did, because after the World Cup break, he looked like a really good, promising player to have right in game week 17, game week 18, game week 19 onwards. But then a lot of people had to sell him right before the deadline for game week 17, because Marco Silva had some comments about him being injured. So everyone sold him. I was never going to have him anyway, so I was really lucky that everyone sold him, and because he scored 2 goals against Crystal Palace, so a lot of people missed out on those points, and then brought him in for the following game week 18, and then he started flopping again. So it's typical Mitrovic. Whenever everyone buys him, he flops, and now he's suspended potentially for a good chunk of the season at least. So can't get a chance to redeem himself either, Mitrovic. But for me, it's not been that much of a troll, but enough to be the final man in the squad. Let's move on to the next one. It is Ben Chilwell. He is currently in my squad. And yeah, he could, like Raya, he could turn it around and be a great player for me. But so far, not so good. I had him last game week. I brought him in for the double game week for Chelsea, game week 27. And yeah, he didn't really perform. And he's been blanking most of the season. But the reason he's in this team is because back in, I think it was game week 10 or something, Chelsea had 3 really promising fixtures. And I figured I could double up with Rhys James and Chilwell as my defenders. Rhys James is, spoilers, another player coming up. Rhys James got injured. And Chilwell had just come back from injury. And I was hoping he was going to start at least 2 of the 3 games, but he ended up starting only 1 of them. So he got a 5-pointer there, a clean sheet and a yellow card. But in the other 2 matches where I was hoping for clean sheets, he didn't play at all. So didn't get any points from him at all. Meanwhile, someone like Trevoh Chalobah, who hasn't really been playing since, played all 3 matches and got 3 clean sheets in a row. So yeah, pretty hard done by Chilwell, but he can still turn it around for me. So I'm holding out hope. He had really good expected numbers last time against Everton, but he still didn't produce any points. And of course, Rhys James got points instead, which is typical. I don't have a good history of Chelsea defenders or City defenders, as we'll get to see eventually. Moving on, next player is my final West Ham player I'm going to talk about today, and that is Kurt Zouma. Zouma actually had, I think, at least 1 clean sheet for me, but I brought him in for game week 8, I think. It was more like a cost-cutting move to get Kevin De Bruyne in midfield. That's also another mistake. Because yeah, I didn't wildcard game week 8. I wildcarded game week 13, which is looking like the biggest flop of my season, like the worst decision I've made so far. Because I brought in Zouma, kept him game week 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, and he got 1 clean sheet out of those 5 matches, even though West Ham had really good fixtures and they had really good underlying numbers as well defensively. But they kept conceding a stupid goal here and there, even though Zouma was playing every game. And then finally, when I wildcarded in game week 13, I sell him, and that's of course the game week where he starts scoring again. In game week 13, played against Bournemouth, scored a goal, kept a clean sheet, got 15 points. A huge haul after I just sold him. So annoyingly, I kept him. I kept faith in him, even though he didn't really repay me, and then he punished me straight away when I sold him, which is typical of a player that fits into this team perfectly. Next player is, it's actually 2 players, and they haven't really performed that badly either. Gabriel Jesus and Eddie Nketiah. I've had an Arsenal striker this whole season. I've had an Arsenal striker every single game week. Even now, the last few game weeks when Nketiah and Jesus have been injured and coming back from injury respectively, I even had Gabriel Martinelli, who's sort of also been underperforming in terms of XGI. And that's the big issue with Jesus and Nketiah. Even though they get a lot of points, they have so much potential that is left underboarded because they don't really take care of their chances. Jesus was like that every game week until game week 16. He got injured during the World Cup, and I had to sell him after the World Cup break. That's when Nketiah came in, and at the start he looked pretty good. He got like a goal in each of the 2 first matches, I think, after the break. Then he had a couple blanks, and then he had a huge 13-pointer against Man United, which was really good. But then after that, in the following like 4 or 5 game weeks, he just had huge chances every game, missed them, and got 0 or 2 points, got blanks every game week, which was really annoying. So yeah, Nketiah / Jesus, they get a spot in the team as well, even though they have performed. It's just so much that I could have had more from them, putting faith in them. A lot of people sold Jesus in game week 8 or game week 9 when the wildcarded. I kept faith in him, and he didn't really repay me either. So Jesus and Nketiah could have done so much more, but since they've been performing decently, they're not that high up in terms of the rankings here. They are the, I guess, 15, 14, 13, 12 pick in the draft. So let's go to number 11, the 11th worst player that I had, and that is Danny Ward. I still have him. I say that I'm going to sell him this game week 29 because I need to do bench boost, and that's sort of why he's in this team. When I needed him the most for bench boost in double game week 29, he's been dropped, finally. Everson started in front of him, and that's the goalkeeper combination I had at the start of the season. I had Danny Ward and Everson, and that flopped massively at the start of the season. Leicester kept conceding goals every single game. They conceded, I think, through the first 7 game weeks, I think they conceded the most goals from any Premier League team in history or something like that. And Ward still kept his place through all of that. And after that, when I started benching him, I brought in some other goalkeepers, one of them being the second goalkeeper in my weekly wildcard draft this week. But yeah, anyways, Ward started performing from game week 8 onwards, game week 8 until pretty much the international break or the World Cup break. And he was on my bench every time, getting 8 points, 10 points, 12 points, 6 points. Just kept getting points on my bench after I kept faith in him in the first 4 game weeks, where he got 1 point in every single game week. So Ward, and of course, finally now, he was my second goalkeeper, like my backup goalkeeper on the wildcard for game week 26. And he lasted like 2 games and then he's dropped again. So yeah, Danny Ward, not been good for me, even though I had him the whole season. And I look forward to just selling him and never looking back to get him. So yeah, that's enough for Danny Ward. Next one is Harry Kane, and it's kind of interesting to have him in a team as an underperforming player because he's been so consistent this whole year. It's really been hard to miss. If you've had Kane, you've pretty much had some points at some point, because I don't think he's gone 2 straight games blanking this whole season. So the reason Kane is in here is because I was, like I said, really close to having him in game week 1, but I went with Bowen and Wilson instead as strikers. Wilson could have been another striker in this team as well. He also let me down a couple times. But anyways, Kane, didn't have him from the start of the season, and he kept punishing me every single game week. And I didn't even have him until the World Cup break. And then after the World Cup break, I figured Kane would be better than Salah and De Bruyne, who were like the more popular picks to go with Haaland at that point. And that was actually the right decision, but Kane got a goal in the first match in game week 17, and then in game week 18, he looked so bad. Spurs looked so bad against Aston Villa that I just felt like, I'm so tired of having underperforming teams or players from underperforming teams, so I'm just going to sell Kane in before game week 19. And that is the game week when he scored 2 goals against Crystal Palace, got an assist, got, I think, 16 points. Yeah, 16 points Kane got. And I just sold him for Darwin, who blanked and got injured straight away, so I had to go immediately reverse it, go back to Kane again, and yeah, I've had Kane ever since. He's still in my squad, but yeah, he had his biggest haul right after I sold him, so that's why he's in this team. Along with the fact that I should have had him from the start of the season and I didn't, and he punished me massively. So it's been an annoying player to have, but still not that annoying. I've actually had some decent striker luck this season. Mainly that's because there are only 3 striker positions, and one of them has been Haaland this whole time, and the other one has been Jesus/Nketiah. So there's really only been a third spot for the attackers that has been a potential troll for me, and that's been Mitrovic. I even had Ivan Toney a couple stints in this season, and he's been really good for me. So yeah, there haven't been that many bad strikers, but these are the 3 worst that I've had, along with Skamaka and Wilson. Those are like the worst strikers I've had so far this season. But anyways, moving on from the strikers, or forwards as they are called in FPL, we have another defender, and it is Rico Lewis. It says Cancelo 2.0, and that might seem like praise for him. It might seem like a good comparison, but for me, as you'll get to see when I get to my number 1 pick, spoilers, it's Cancelo. I am not a big fan of Cancelo in terms of FPL. He's been awful for me this entire time, the whole last 2, 3, 4 seasons when he's been playing regularly. But anyways, Rico Lewis might be the next Cancelo, might be the next player to annoy me. He's annoyed me so far this season as well. I brought him in after he started playing rather than Cancelo, right after the World Cup break. And it looked like he was going to be like the next fullback for City and getting some playtime. And Guardiola even praised him and said, like, we need more performances like we get from Rico Lewis. And then, of course, following that comment, he was benched in 4 of the 5 game weeks after that. And I think the 5th game week that he did actually start, he was subbed off at the half when they kept a clean sheet. So incredibly frustrating player to own, but the fact that he was only 4.0 and he wasn't really someone I brought in to get him. He was brought in so I could get more money to get another midfielder. Once again, Kevin De Bruyne, who could have been in this team. Actually, Kevin De Bruyne, he's not. But anyways, Rico Lewis is awful for me, but he was cheap and he was never really someone I put that much faith in anyway. But just a really annoying player to own, and I hope I don't have to own him in the future either. Moving on, next one is Andreas Pereira, and as you can see, it says bench hauls. He has had 2 goals and 10 assists this season, Andreas. I've had him for pretty much the entire season. There have been like 3 or 4 game weeks I didn't have him. And out of those 2 goals and 10 assists, I've only had one of them as with him as my starter. So he's gotten a lot of points off the bench, 5 points, 7 points, 10 points, but he's just stayed on the bench with a lot of points. And whenever I needed him, he's just come up short every time. His only return was an assist in double game week 25, I think, where he got 5 points through 2 games, which is still terrible. That's pretty much 2 blanks as well. So he's just been collecting 2-pointers and 3-pointers as my starter and been getting a lot of points on my bench. So really annoying player to own. I know a lot of people have had luck with him and had him in for game weeks where they needed him and he's performed, but not for me at all. And yeah, really annoying player. But I said that I didn't have him for a couple game weeks, and the player that I did have instead in like the midway part of the season was this guy, Leon Bailey. As you can see from the description under his name, he had 20 points in the 2 matches I benched him, and he had 5 points in the 4 matches I started him. Because I had him at the start of the season as well, had him for the first 2 game weeks, and he flopped in both those games, and I sold him. Then I brought him back once they got Unai Emery in charge on my wildcard. I think it was my wildcard before the World Cup break. And the wildcard in game week 13. And he was benched in the first game week because I had such a good team, and he ended up with 13 points. And then I start him and he gets like 2 points, I think. And then I bench him in the next game week again and he gets 7 points. And then I start him in the following 2 game weeks and he gets 2 blanks again. So yeah, another super frustrating player to own for me. And haven't had him since. And yeah, I'm not going to buy him either at this point. Next one. This is my starting goalkeeper, Robert Sanchez. I had him, like I said, I had Ward and Everson from the start of the season, and that's when Sanchez was really good. From game week 1 to game week 4, he got point returns in every single game week. I think he had like 28 points or something through the first 4 game weeks. And that's the point when I brought him in for Everson, and he got 2 1-pointers, and then I figured I just need to sell him because that was when Brighton had a lot of postponed fixtures and stuff. So I had to sell him anyway and buy Nick Pope, who did pretty well for me. But anyways, he got 1 point there, Sanchez. And then I brought him back. Of course, I brought him back for the wildcard in game week 26, along with Ward. But Sanchez was dropped straight away in game week 26. And now Ward has been dropped in game week 28. And that means I've had to use 2 hits to take out my goalkeepers just so I can have a bench boost in game week 29, double game week 29, which is super annoying. So both those goalkeepers have been terrible for me. And yeah. I don't like him. I have Raya now, and I'm going to get Everson as well. So yeah, Sanchez and Ward, never again. Sanchez has even been terrible for me in previous seasons as well, and he's been like a decent goalkeeper in FPL terms the last 2 or 3 seasons, but never for me, and not again this year either. So I hope he's just benched forever now, or moves on to a different league. Next up, we have another midfielder, and it is Phil Foden. I've mentioned Kevin De Bruyne a couple times in this video, and I've always brought in Kevin De Bruyne when other players have performed better in the City midfield. But De Bruyne still performed pretty well for me. He performed actually better than his average score, like points per match, Kevin De Bruyne. But I had him from game week 8 onwards when Phil Foden was absolutely amazing for some reason. Foden just turned it on, scored a hat-trick against Man United. I think he had like 9 points, 11 points, and 8 points. He even had like a 19-pointer or something as well. Huge point returns, and then I buy him, and then immediately he just starts not playing. He's on the bench, and he flops when he gets the chance to play, and he was just awful for me. So yeah, again, Foden, the City Pep Roulette thing is killing me every season, and this season is just the same. And I got to experience that with Foden. And I even had Foden after the World Cup break from game week 17 onwards. I figured now he's back. He looked pretty good in the World Cup, and he's going to get his chance now. But no, still, he was benched when Mahrez was a much better pick. And Mahrez was someone I kind of wanted to get as well, but I was just too scared of the Pep Roulette. And I went with Foden, who I thought was a more sure starter, but Foden didn't start, just struggled this whole time, and I had to sell him eventually. Moving on, next one, another player. It keeps getting worse from this point, so yeah, I'm going to be really let down whenever I see all the names because I remember all the bad times I've had with them. And Trossard, haven't had a single return from him. He's been a great player this season in FPL, but never for me. I wanted him from the start of the season, and I didn't, and he got a lot of points. And then I think game week 12 is the first game week I brought him in during the big blank game week for Man City and Arsenal. And he had a really favorable fixture, and he blanked, because that's what Trossard does. He has a favorable fixture, and he blanks. And then I brought him back for game week 15 and 16, 2 more great fixtures, and 2 more blanks for Trossard. And then I keep the faith in game week 17. I figured Trossard is the one player I want to own. I was thinking, oh, De Zerbi's come in, and he really transformed Berardi at Brighton to be really, or at Brighton as Sassuolo to be a really good player, and he could do the same for Trossard, I figured. But of course, Trossard and De Zerbi did not get along, and Trossard blanked, and then he got subbed off after like 59 minutes, I think, in the third game, and he was never seen in a Brighton shirt again, and I had to sell him. And now he's been pretty good for Arsenal again, so yeah, Trossard is a really annoying player as well to own. Just blanks, and then he was dropped when I was dead set from game week 17 onwards to just, I'm going to keep him, and even though he doesn't perform, I'm going to just keep him because he's going to perform eventually. But then he was dropped and didn't play for Brighton, and I had to sell him. So typical. Moving on, next player is another midfielder, and it's the final midfielder. It is Miguel Almiron. Been a huge hero to many of you guys in FPL this season, but for me, he's been nothing but trouble. He's been awful, and it's made even worse from the fact that, as you can see, it says FPL crash in the infamous crash of game week, I think it's game week 13 or game week 14, something like that. I was going to pay attention to the Man City team news and see if Foden was starting or not, if I wanted to sell him, and then I got the news that Foden has been dropped. He's not going to start, and I tried to do the transfer. I tried to do Foden to Almiron, and then the whole FPL page crashes, and the transfer doesn't get confirmed. And of course, Almiron goes on to score a 12-pointer, and he keeps scoring points all the way until the World Cup break as well. So after the World Cup break, I figured, okay, I should bring him in because he's been so good for Newcastle this season. And they had really good fixtures. He was really cheap. But like with Bailey previously in the season, I had to bench him in the first game week because I had such a strong squad, and that's when he scored another 8-pointer. I figured, okay, Almiron is still good even after the World Cup. I'm going to start him from now on. And that's when he started blanking. Like I've said with a couple of these players, whenever I bring them in and start playing them, that's when they start blanking. So he blanked, and all of a sudden I just have to sell him. Not all of a sudden, like after 4 or 5 game weeks of no returns, I sell him, and then straight away when I sell him, he scores. Typical again. So yeah, moving on, the final two, the 2 defenders, and one of them is Rhys James. He's just been an injury mess this whole season. I didn't have him from the start of the season for game week 1 and game week 2 when I figured he's too injury prone. Tuchel plays him at right centre back, and Chelsea aren't that good defensively. And then he got 14 points in the first 2 game weeks, Rhys James. So he got a clean sheet against Everton, pretty lucky in game week 1, and then game week 2 they actually conceded, but then he was played as a right wing back finally from Tuchel, who kept using him out of position, and he scored, of course, because when he plays right wing back he's usually really good, except when he's injured. So after that I brought him in, and then a couple games later he's injured yet again, and I actually brought him back for game week 17 after the World Cup break because he was back fit and it looked like he was going to be good. He had good fixtures, and we all know what Rhys James could do when he's playing and he's fit and he plays as a wing back. But he gets injured again. So he's just been injured, and I kept him even though he was injured. Kept him all the way until he was healthy again because I had other fires to put out. I had other players to sell. And yeah, even when he came back and was fit again, he re-injured himself, got sick again, and yeah, he just keeps getting injured or sick whenever I have him. So I sold him, and of course he got the points against Everton that I wanted Chilwell to get. But Rhys James is just so overrated in terms of an FPL prospect. Like, he just gets injured all the time. You can't trust him at all. So yeah, sure, he can get like huge point hauls. We remember a season or 2 ago when he had 13 points, 14 points, 15 points in like a few game weeks. But that's usually not what happens with Rhys James. Usually just gets injured, and that's why I'm not really considering bringing him in, even though Chelsea have really good fixtures going forward. Next player up, and the final player, I've talked about him already. I said that he's going to be the number 1 pick, or the number 1 most annoying player I've had this season, and that is Joao Cancelo, sorry, that's how you say it in Portuguese. Cancelo, again, he has such a horrible past for me in terms of FPL. I was actually one of the first people that got him in FPL when he started playing regularly for Pep Guardiola a couple seasons ago. And he was always that type of player that looked really good. He had like decent crosses, decent shooting chances and stuff, but he never got the huge hauls that I expected from him. He kept getting like 6 points, like clean sheets and stuff, and sometimes they even drop the clean sheet because that's what City does. But I had him for so long as like one of the few early on when he was getting playing time regularly, and since then I haven't really had him that much when he's been performing really well. And that was the same fact at the start of this season, because I figured Cancelo, he's not that sure of a player. He doesn't do as well as, for example, the Liverpool fullbacks. He's not as good offensively as them in terms of underlying numbers. And I figured I could have Kyle Walker instead of Cancelo from the start of the season. And even though Cancelo and Kyle Walker had pretty identical stats, I think it was like they're like 13th and 14th for all defenders in terms of underlying numbers, expected goals involvement in the first 6 game weeks. But Cancelo was still the highest scoring defender by far in that time frame, because he just got a lucky goal here, got a lucky assist here, got bonus points, clean sheet points, everything that everyone that had him from game week 1 onwards managed to get for their team. I didn't get. I didn't have Cancelo for the first 10 or 11, 12 game weeks, I think. And then finally, wildcard game week 13. One of my biggest mistakes, or the biggest mistake I did this season, was wildcarding game week 13 rather than game week 8. One of the reasons was because I got Cancelo first in game week 13 onwards, and that's when he's been terrible. Game week 13 onwards, he had a couple blanks. He had 1 clean sheet, I think, for me, and then he had the red card against Fulham. He was subsequently dropped. I still kept him in my game week 17 squad after the World Cup break, because Kimo convinced me to, my co-host from the podcast, Kimo, convinced me to just keep him because he's been hurting me every time I haven't had him. But then he got dropped, and then he even got loaned out to Bayern Munich. And I hope he just stays away from the Premier League, because he's been nothing but trouble for me every single season in FPL. And I know he's such a popular pick as well. He's been so good for a lot of people for the last 3 or 4 seasons, but just never for me. So never again, Cancelo. I hope you never return to the Premier League. I hope you go to Barcelona. I actually want you to go to Barcelona, even though I kind of support Barcelona as well. I just want him to go there, so he just stays away from the Premier League for as long as he can. So anyways, that is my squad for the 15 players that I have had the hardest time owning this season. All these players have been annoying at some points, and barely any one of them have had decent returns. I mean, Kane is one of the exceptions, but he has his own story, and Jesus and Nketiah as well. The strikers have been decent this whole season for me, but midfield and defense especially, but just been terrible. All those 10 players in defense and midfield, and the 2 goalkeepers, just been horrible pretty much all season. Anyways, that's it for the weekly wildcard draft this week. It will be back in its normal form next week. There hasn't been that much content this week because there's obviously an international break. And we didn't get to record a podcast either because both Kevin and Kimo were unavailable. Kevin has just moved into a different place, and he didn't have Wi-Fi, and Kimo has been traveling and stuff, so we didn't manage to record a podcast this week. But we will be back with the podcast next week, and I'll be back with more regular content as well. I won't have the weekend walkthrough because we had that on Monday, the weekend walkthrough for game week 28, where we looked at the weekend's games in the Premier League. But seeing as there are no Premier League games this weekend, we can't do that. It's an international break. But we will still have the weekly wildcard draft on either Tuesday or Wednesday, and then we'll have the FPL Scope podcast on the Thursday, and then I'll have my team selection video on the Friday next week as well. And I might potentially even make another video because I think we might get fixtures announced pretty soon, double game of fixtures and stuff. So I might just make like a bigger video with like chip tactics and what you want to do going forward as well. So yeah, I hope you look forward to that. You can also join our mini league, as you can see above me there, actually higher up there. You can join our mini league with the league code 6IYV7U, and yeah, just keep a lookout for content. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you want to. Like the YouTube channel, like the video if you liked it, and comment with your most annoying players this season as well. Who have been the worst players to own for you guys? It might be completely different for me. You might have some of these players have performed for you. Maybe you had Foden from game week 8 and he was amazing for you. And maybe you had Mitrovic from the start of the season and he's been amazing for you. Or if you had Kane the whole season, maybe he's been amazing as well. So a lot of these players have performed, just not for me. So tell me which players have been terrible for you guys. And do you have any similarities to my team? But anyways, that's enough for me. I'm rambling again. So take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.